This is how his story was supposed to end. Taken out by the woman he was supposed to marry. He's barely breathing, but somehow he smiles. He tells her she's beautiful, especially because he could never have her. She stands over him as the rain falls. It's over. With his final breath, he curses her for what she's done. That's when a system message appears. The engagement is officially broken. The condition? Deculane's elimination. But none of it was real. Turns out, it was all just a game being tested. A developer sat back in his chair, relieved that the stage had finally cleared. Kim Woo-jin was just happy that the game didn't crash this time. He'd put all his effort into this one character, Deculane. After a lot of work, he'd finally fixed a bug that kept crashing one of the story routes. But the pressure was huge. If it flopped, the studio was finished. He decided to check the character settings one more time. The guy he'd been working overtime on for months. A head professor with a crazy amount of mana. He was the main character of the episode Woo-jin had just fixed. In the game, he was one of the villains you had to face in the middle of the story. His character had so many different story paths that it created endless problems for the developers. He looked over the character's attributes. The foundation of Deculane's personality came from two traits that didn't make sense together. Whiz Kid and Average Mage. As a child, everyone called Deculane a magical genius. But the truth was, his talent was completely average. Looking at all the negative traits he'd piled on, Woo-jin wondered if Deculane could even be considered human. But there was one huge problem. From the very start of the game, he was completely surrounded by people who wanted him gone. He decided to add one last attribute to the character, something that wouldn't be too obvious. He found one called comprehension, but once he started, he couldn't stop. He began adding every cool-looking attribute he could find. When he finally finished, he felt a little embarrassed. He had just piled on everything that sounded good. He figured he should probably change it all back before it caused a problem in the game. But hearing a weird sounds, he looks to the side and noticed the night sky was gone, replaced by a massive, swirling vortex crackling with lightning. His eyes were wide with shock, trying to process what he was seeing. It looked like a giant hole had been punched right through it. Then, a blinding flash of light erupted from the center. For a split second, a horrifying skeletal face flashed in his mind. His entire world was twisting, and he didn't understand what was happening. Darkness wrapped around him, pulling him apart. He felt completely lost. He gasped, a sharp pain shooting through his chest. A woman's voice screamed at him, demanding that he get up right now. His eyes snapped open. It was his sister, Yuriel. She was absolutely furious, screaming about how long he'd been sleeping. A maid stood behind her, looking terrified. Deculane just let out a quiet, "It had been a few days since he'd woken up in this body." The whole thing still felt like a dream. She kept yelling, accusing him of hiding away because of some woman and bringing shame to their family. He just sat there, taking it all in. Yuriel threw a stack of papers on the floor. She warned him to get up and get to work if he didn't want to get fired. It all started a week ago, after the day the sky looked so strange. He woke up in a strange body, in a place he didn't recognize. He quickly figured it out. He was in the world of the game he had made. The scenery outside was familiar. He knew it was real. But the worst part wasn't just being in the game. It was that he'd become the one character who could never escape his fate. He had become the villain. It's been a week since he arrived here, in Deculane's bedroom at the Euclid Manor. At first, he thought the whole thing was just a dream. But as the days went by, the feeling of being alive was too real to ignore. He finally had to accept the truth. He wondered if this was some kind of afterlife, if he'd actually died back then. But it didn't matter. Only one thing was certain. He had become the villain of the very game he helped create. His new name was Deculane von Gran, Euclid. In the game, Deculane was the middle boss, an enemy you had to face no matter what path you chose. He was the source of every problem, the enemy of everyone, a man who had caused pain to countless characters. He couldn't understand why, of all people, he had to become this hated villain. On top of everything, he had no idea where he was in the game's timeline. He was completely lost. The only thing he knew for sure was the total amount of mana he had. But without knowing how fast it was used, he couldn't prepare for anything. He was flying blind. He remembered his team testing the game about 1,000 times back when they were making it. He'd seen every possible path, every choice a player could make. And out of all those thousands of playthroughs, Deculane only survived once, just one single time. His entire purpose was to be a roadblock for the hero. He was a villain designed to be defeated and then die. He picked up the papers his sister had thrown. It was a lesson plan for a lecture at the Imperial University. This must have been what the original Deculane was working on. He thought about the woman who had stormed in earlier, Yuriel von Gran Euclid, his half-sister. She was the one running their entire noble house in his place. It was obvious that she and Deculane did not get along. He remembered her screaming about some woman, and he was pretty sure she was talking about his fiancée, Julie. He figured something bad must have just happened between the original Deculane and her. He remembered her final warning as she left the room. If he didn't want to get fired from his professor job, he needed to get up and go. That word, professor, clicked in his mind. The lecture was today. He let out a quiet, he had to go. He'd never given a lecture in his life, but he knew he had to do something. It was the only way to start gathering information. The system had given him a primary goal, become necessary to the game. There was also a side quest for the university lecture, which would earn him some store currency. He remembered those words floating in front of his face the moment he woke up here. Between the quest and Yuriel's warning, he knew he had to get moving. He remembered that in the game, his own sister was one of the many people who could cause his death. That store currency was important, but what was he supposed to lecture on? gone. He wasn't worried, though. He had a secret weapon. Turns out, this body came with a special attribute called comprehension. It was a unique skill that let him understand anything, as long as he had the mana for it. He sat there for a moment, thinking. He remembered giving this attribute to the character himself, back when he was designing the game. He'd hoped it would give the villain a little bit of empathy, and since it was a unique skill that only showed up late in the game, he figured it probably had some hidden effects he didn't even know about yet. He got up and went to the bathroom, which was bigger than most people's houses. Everything was new, the clothes, the room, but it all felt strangely familiar. It was like he'd been living this life all along. Normally, he would have felt awkward wearing clothes this fancy, but now it just felt right. It was actually comfortable. He realized this was another one of the character's attributes kicking in. Skills like intimidation and dignity and aesthetic sense were literally changing how he felt. It felt like the body itself was telling him that it belonged to him now. The old Kim Woo-jin was fading away. Even his personality was changing. The strict, formal way Declan acted used to feel stiff, but now it felt completely natural. His main goal was to gather information. But as he walked toward his first lecture, he wasn't just pretending anymore. He was Declan. The body itself seemed to believe it, that he was a noble, a superior being. Every step he took was filled with a confidence that wasn't his, but a voice in his head, his real voice, just scoffed at the idea. He wasn't a noble. He was Kim Woo-jin, a totally normal guy from South Korea. He remembered what someone once called him before they broke up. She said he was a pathetic, lazy person, and he knew it was true. That's why he wasn't going to lose himself to this new identity. He wouldn't let his guard down for a second. He got into the car. He'd never been in anything this nice before. The thought of expensive cars brought back a bad memory, one that still made him angry. That's when he noticed someone else was in the car with him. He had absolutely no idea who this person was. The young man jumped, startled. He quickly greeted Declan as Professor and nervously handed over a folder. Declan took the folder, wondering if this was his assistant. He then asked the young man if he was a wizard. The assistant stammered that he'd been working for him for 3 years, but then quickly said he was just joking. He looked at the document. He thought it was lecture material, but it was just a script for him to read. The original Declan didn't even write his own lessons. The assistant explained that the folder contained the entire lecture from start to finish. He realized the original Declan was so arrogant and untalented that he couldn't even be bothered to prepare his own lessons. This meant his assistant had done all the work. It took a real effort for him to even form the words to thank him. He managed to say it. Good work. The assistant flinched, completely shocked. He couldn't believe what he'd just heard. Declan then told him to get some rest until they arrived. The young man, still trying to process the compliment, quickly agreed. The moment the words left his mouth, he felt sick. Just complimenting someone made his body react badly. This had to be the real Declan's personality fighting back. He'd felt it since leaving the manor. The original Declan's consciousness was slowly invading his own. Just then, the driver announced they had arrived. He stepped out of the car. This was it, the Imperial University, Declan's workplace. He looked out at the campus. It was just as impressive as he remembered from the game he'd created. He checked the details from the letter in his mind. The lecture was supposed to be in Roteo Hall. Inside, the lecture hall was already packed. The students were buzzing, excited to finally hear from Head Professor Declan. He could hear them whispering as he approached. They were talking about his reputation as a master of spell interpretation, a child prodigy. The chatter stopped the second he walked in. He had their full attention. He walked to the front of the hall and introduced himself. He was Declan von Grahan Uklan, the head professor of the Magic Tower. Then, he looked out at the students and announced that the lecture was about to begin. Many of the students were completely starstruck. They whispered about how handsome and smart he was. But not everyone felt that way. For one student, this moment wasn't about admiration. It was about finally meeting her target. Her name was Epherene, and she saw Declan as the man who destroyed her father. In her mind, she was screaming. To her, he wasn't a professor. He was just a monster. 3 years ago, her father passed away. He had spent years researching spell interpretation, but someone stole his thesis. The shock was too much, and he never recovered. The man who stole it was praised by everyone. They called him a genius spell interpreter, and that person was Declan. He was the man she had to take down. But at the time, she couldn't do anything. After her father was gone, she lost everything. Even though she was born a noble, she lost her family's house and their land. She was left an orphan with nowhere to go. So, she made a pledge. She swore to get revenge on the man who had ruined her life. After making that pledge, she poured everything she had into her goal. It took a huge effort, but she finally got into the Empire's Royal University, the same place where Declan taught. She knew the truth, even if the other students didn't. His famous spell interpretation skill was a lie, built on her father's work. And with that lie, he had ruined her entire family. So how could he stand there so arrogantly? That position, that respect, it should have all belonged to her father. She wanted nothing more than to expose his lies and make him pay, right here and now. She just stared at him, the promise of revenge burning inside her. But she forced herself to hold back. To really drag him down, she needed to prepare for the perfect revenge. Declan's voice cut through the room. He told everyone to be quiet. The lecture was starting. He introduced himself again, head professor of the Magic Tower and a monarch mage who controlled elements. He started with the basics, explaining that magic has 3 main attributes and 9 different types. The attributes, he explained, are the very source of all magic. He then listed the elements and the 9 types, from summoning and destruction destruction, all the way to bewitchment. The final type was harmony. As he spoke, he couldn't help but think. This was way easier than he'd expected. After all, it was his first lecture ever, and he didn't actually know any magic theory. He was just reading from the script his assistant had prepared. But as he read the words, something strange happened. It wasn't just reading anymore. He could perfectly understand everything. Turns out, the original Decalean's personality traits were actually helping him. His overpowering grace was making every single student focus on his words. Even his elitism, which should have been annoying, was making his intense eye contact feel natural instead of threatening. He started to think that maybe, just maybe, this version of Decalean had all the makings of a great teacher. He continued the lecture, explaining how mana is stored differently in the body. He explained that mages store mana in their heads, which is best for imagining spells. Knights store it in their hearts, letting it flow through their bodies. And finally, there was the inner core, a place that could mix both internal and external mana. His point was simple. Hard work is important, he told them. But if you aren't talented, you have to choose one thing and focus on it. As soon as he said it, he thought to himself that it was the perfect thing for Decalean to say. Because honestly, the original Decalean didn't have amazing talent either. He was well aware of his own limits. His mana was decent, but he knew there were monsters in this world with 10 times his power. He found it ironic, giving advice that he himself needed to hear. He announced the end of the lecture, but then he paused. He noticed the last part of the script was weird. He wondered if he should really read what was written there. He realized the original Decalean would have just ignored it. The arrogant professor wouldn't have bothered. So, instead of reading from the script, he turned to the class and asked if anyone had questions. The students just looked at each other. No one said a word. He was relieved. Just as he was about to end the class, a voice called out his name. A student in a hood stood up. She asked about a mysterious spell found in the dorms last night. One people thought was the work of a devil. She challenged him directly, asking what the genius spell interpreter thought about it. The student wasn't finished. She then asked if he was even really from the university's magic tower. Decalean looked at her coldly. He told her that anyone from the tower would know to state their name and affiliation before asking a question. He refused to answer a question from a child who didn't know basic etiquette. Epherene was speechless. But this wasn't just arrogance. In his mind, he admitted he had no choice. Turns out, his comprehension skill used a huge amount of mana. His reserves were already low. He'd used over 1,000 mana just to understand the lecture script. Analyzing a spell he'd never seen before could drain him completely. The other students didn't know any of this. They just saw a rude student get shut down and they started to laugh. They all thought she was just trying to get noticed and failed miserably. Epherene gritted her teeth, completely humiliated. Just as Decalean was about to leave, Epherene shouted for him to wait. She explained that there was a mysterious spell going around, but the magic tower refused to analyze it. She told him that if anyone could figure it out, it was him. Before he could refuse, she cast the spell herself, projecting the complex green magic into the air. She pleaded with him to analyze it. The entire hall watched, waiting to see what the famous professor would do. He looked at the spell, and instantly his mana plummeted. He was left with almost nothing. This was exactly what he'd been trying to avoid. Not knowing this, Epherene kept talking. She explained that the other students were stuck and that even a small hint would be enough. But Decalean cut her off, saying there was no need for hints. Epherene looked completely stunned. As he walked out the door, he gave them the answer. It was a bewitchment-type barrier spell, and it seemed like someone was trying to trap them. And with that, he was gone. Epherene just stood there, completely stunned. It was over before it even began. At that same moment, a message appeared for Decalean. The system confirmed he'd completed the side quest and rewarded him with store currency. Later, in the university's magic tower cafeteria, a group of students were talking. Epherene was there too, angrily shoving food in her mouth. She muttered to herself, calling Decalean an annoying bastard. She replayed the whole thing in her head. Her plan was to use an unknown spell to expose his so-called spell interpretation skill as a total lie. But instead, he just made her look like an idiot with no manners for not even saying her name. She was so embarrassed, she thought she was going to die right there. Still, she thought he seemed flustered. Maybe he just threw out the term bewitchment spell as a guess to get away. After all, bewitching magic was incredibly difficult. Most spells of that type needed specific parameters to even work. To identify one without any parameters at all seemed impossible. She remembered his official story, that the spell on the dormitory door was just a test to help the freshmen with their research skills. She was sure he was the idiot, not her. Just then, another student ran up, calling her name excitedly. The student was out of breath. She told Epherene that they'd analyzed the spell from the dorm. Turns out, Decalean was right all along. Epherene couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her friend laughed, saying Epherene was so brave for confronting the professor when everyone else was too scared. She still couldn't quite believe the spell was real. The other student went on about how amazing Decalean was for figuring it out with no clues. But for Epherene, that idea was impossible. It just couldn't be true. As she left, the student thanked Epherene and promised to add her name to their report. Epherene just numbly agreed. She refused to accept it. He must have just gotten lucky. And the worst part was, she had done nothing but improve his reputation. Epherene looked at the paper in her hands. It was the course material for Decalean's lecture on elemental magic. She decided right then, if she was going to beat him, she had to know him. She would take his class. She gripped her shirt tight. She told herself she couldn't waver, not if she had to see his annoying face every day. In her mind, she saw him standing there, and she made a promise. She crushed the paper in her fist. She was going to expose him, no matter what it took. going to expose him, no matter what it took. As Decalayan walked down the university hall, a message from the system appeared. He had completed the lecture quest and earned a little store currency. He let out a quiet breath. That could have gone very badly. He remembered the moment he'd looked at the spell. His special skill, comprehension, had activated all on its own. The spell circle was so tangled and complex that just looking at it was enough to drain all the mana he had left. The truth was, he hadn't actually understood the spell. Even with twice his mana, he wouldn't have been able to figure it out. He was just glad it all worked out. That's when he saw someone and greeted them. He stopped. He knew exactly who that was. Standing before him was Julie von Dea Freiden, his fiancée. He recognized her instantly. He'd seen that face countless times back when he was designing the game. She asked him how he'd been. She was a woman destined to become one of the greatest knights in the world. He just hadn't expected to run into her so soon. Decalayan gave a simple reply, saying he was fine. Her eyes narrowed. She questioned if he was really fine, especially after breaking a promise they had made just a week ago. He froze. He had no idea what promise she was talking about. It was another mess left behind by the original Declan. The best move was to avoid it. He told her he didn't recall and tried to walk away, but she wasn't letting him go. She stepped right in his path, accusing him of trying to run away just like he always did. He realized she wasn't going to let him pass. He was stuck, so he tried a different approach. He claimed he'd forgotten because of a fever he'd had and asked her to tell him what promise they had made. Her mind went back to that day. She had asked him to promise that he would be truthful to himself. He had to confess his lies and his arrogance to everyone. If he did that, she promised she would stay with him, even if the entire world fell apart. Her expression hardened. She told him it looked like she was wrong to have trusted him. She turned away from him, her voice cold as she told him he could go. He just stood there, watching her walk away. He simply excused himself and walked away. Julie stood frozen, her fists clenched tight. She was furious. Her mind went back to how it all started. Their engagement was never about love. It was just a deal. He was a talented mage, and she was a talented knight. On paper, it was a perfect match. The union was seen as a huge win, great for politics and for strengthening their bloodlines. The Yucklines and the Freidens were two of the most powerful families in the empire. No one objected to the marriage, so she accepted it. She told herself it was for the good of her family, even if she didn't love him. But after the deal was made, both households realized something important. There was a problem. The problem was his so-called talents never existed in the first place. He lied to the world, calling himself a genius just to become a professor. But for the last 3 years, he hadn't made any progress at all. Despite all this, the Yucklines and the Freidens tried to keep it quiet. She knew why. They were powerful families who didn't want to be the subject of gossip. They didn't want their weakness shown to the world. But Julie couldn't accept it. A marriage without love was one thing, but she couldn't stand the lies. It went against her convictions as a knight. That was the only reason. And to her surprise, Deculayan simply agreed to do as she said. She was stunned. She had to confirm that he really understood what they had just agreed to. She looked at him with cold disappointment. She accused him of never planning to keep their promise at all. Her hand tightened on the hilt of her sword. The story then shifts to the Magic Tower at the Imperial University. This was the best university in the entire game, and the magic department was the most important one of all. He thought about it in terms from his old life. The department was like a top medical school, and this tower was the best hospital in the country. He had to admit, it looked nice. The huge campus and perfectly kept gardens reminded him of an American college, and he remembered all the nights he and his team spent working just to create this exact feeling. He thought about how much nicer it would be to experience this beautiful campus if he wasn't trapped in Deculayan's body. Suddenly, he heard someone running up behind him. He turned, his expression instantly on alert. A student crashed right into him, sending a box of papers flying everywhere. The student sat on the ground, apologizing. He explained that he was in a hurry to see his professor. Deculayan recognized him. For a second, he thought it was an ambush. He looked down at the student and called him Zorro. The student looked flustered and quickly corrected him. His name was Alan. Deculayan just said he must have been mistaken. Alan sat there, completely confused. A little later, they were in Deculayan's office. Alan explained why he'd been in such a rush. He was bringing the professor the list of sponsorships for the new mages. Basically, magic research costs a lot of money, so the professors at the Magic Tower sponsor new mages they think are promising. Deculayan looked over the list. As he scanned the documents, something caught his eye. One of the names on the list was literally glowing gold. A skill called Shining Gold was activating, probably because of his wealthy magnate attribute. Turns out, it was a combination of two of his skills. Gave him an instinct for things that would pay off, and sharp eyesight let him actually see that instinct. Put together, it meant he could literally see which students were a good investment. He flipped through the pages. A few other names had a faint glow, but one was shining brighter than all the rest. It was Epherene Luna, the one student who wanted him gone more than anyone. Deculayan knew exactly who she was. Epherene Luna, one of the main characters from the game. He remembered her story well. The original Deculayan was the reason she lost her father. But as he looked at her file, something didn't add up. He asked the staff member why someone with her potential had no sponsors at all. The man explained that everyone was too afraid. Deculayan understood immediately. No one would dare support her because they were scared of what he might do. And that was a shame, because her talent was real. She was skilled enough to get it into the magic tower without even attending the academy. He knew their history. Epherene was his enemy, or more accurately, he was hers. The original Dekulin had earned her hatred. He remembered one of the many ways he could die in the game. If he just let things play out, he would meet that same ending again. A system window appeared, showing one of his traits, Villain's fate. The whole world wanted him gone, but the description offered a sliver of hope. What doesn't kill him makes him stronger. He remembered all the ways Dekulin was meant to die in the game. Sometimes it was a sword through the heart. Other times it was a spell to the head or poison in his drink. Sometimes he was just caught in a bombing. No matter what happened, the result was always the same. He didn't survive. If he wanted to live, he had to make a different choice. A choice the original Dekulin never would have made. So he put his plan into motion. He called over a student named Alan. He gave him the papers and a list of books he needed from the library. Alan agreed and left the office, closing the large doors behind him. With the office now empty, Dekulin sat alone at his desk, thinking about his next move. He knew that to survive, he needed a lot of money. Many of the death roots from the game could be overcome with enough cash. Investing in a promising mage was one way to get that money, but he knew that wouldn't be enough. The world was full of powerful people who hated him. They would try to take him out any chance they got. So to truly survive, he needed something else. He needed a way out. The only real answer was power. He had to become strong. He came to a simple conclusion. The only way to survive in this world was to become stronger. But there was a problem. The original Dekulin's talents were just average. At this rate, he couldn't possibly handle the threats he knew were coming. If he didn't have enough power, he'd never survive the countless deaths waiting for him. He did have one thing in his favor, though: his attributes. The original Dekulin always boasted about controlling all 4 elements, but that was a lie. His real potential was in manipulating just 2, earth and fire. And when he combined those elements with metal, it created a completely different attribute. It was a unique skill called the Midas Touch. The system described it as a special ability that used his own mana to unlock the hidden potential in anything he touched. This talent for manipulating metal gave him a unique fighting style, controlling levitating blades. It sounded impressive, but it was really just telekinesis. The thing is, it was a power almost no one else in this world had. He opened a book on basic manipulation magic. He figured he could make up for his lack of raw power by changing the properties of the metal itself. But to do any of that, he had to start with the basics. He needed to learn how to manipulate simple objects first. So he decided to test it out. He focused his mana, channeling it through his hands. The energy surged from his fingertips. A massive, complex magic circle erupted around him, filling the entire room with its light. It wasn't just a light show. All the information, every single spell for basic telekinesis, was being forced directly into his mind. He let out a breath, feeling the new knowledge settle in. He thought maybe this time it would actually work. He focused on a pen on his desk. It lifted into the air, surrounded by a faint magical glow. Then he tried it on himself. He rose from the floor, floating effortlessly. It worked. He had done it. He'd memorized the entire spell. Now he could use basic telekinesis without even thinking about it, just like in the game. But as he sat back down, he realized this was just the beginning. Basic telekinesis wasn't going to be enough to survive what was coming. He needed to be much stronger. He wondered what his next step should be. He had to find a way to push his power to the next level. That's when a crazy idea hit him. What if he didn't just cast a magic circle, but covered his entire body with them? He knew that in this world, magic circles got stronger the bigger they were. So, he thought, if he used his skill to fully understand his own body, he could engrave magic circles, not just in his mind, but across his entire being, his heart, his core, everything. It would be the ultimate way to strengthen his telekinesis. Of course, he knew a plan like that could easily overload his body and cause serious side effects. But that's when he remembered a unique skill he had: Iron Man. The system confirmed it. This body had the highest possible potential, and the Iron Man attribute was designed to let him endure exactly this kind of strain. He was the only one in the world who could even try something like this. He checked his current mana level. It was at 800. That was more than enough to give his new theory a try. Without wasting another moment, he stood in the center of the room and unleashed his power. The magic surged through his body, a wild mix of red and blue energy. He tried to force the magic circles into his very being, but the power was too much to handle. Instantly, a terrible pain shot through his entire body. It felt like every bone was breaking and every muscle was being torn apart. But even then, he refused to even make a sound. That was the elegance a noble was supposed to have. The energy finally faded, leaving him standing there in the silence. He was completely exhausted. The experiment had failed, but not because of the pain. He had simply run out of mana. But the experiment wasn't a complete failure. He had gained something from it. A magic circle was now permanently etched onto his shoulder. He figured at this rate, it would take about 2 weeks to cover his entire body. A month passed. It was the first day of Dekulin's lecture at the University Magic Tower. But when the students arrived, Dekulin wasn't there. Instead, they found a wooden sign with a simple instruction. He wanted to test their abilities, and they should bring him any result they could create from the area. The students were completely lost. lost. They wondered if this was why they were outside, and more importantly, where Professor Deculayan was. Epherene immediately thought he was being irresponsible. Another student started complaining loudly, furious that he would just tell them to study by themselves on the first day. She wasn't looking where she was going, and slammed right into Epherene. The student who bumped into Epherene spun around, looking furious, but she froze mid-sentence. She looked up and saw who was standing in front of her. It was Sylvia von Josephine Illide. The other student just stood there, completely speechless. She looked up at Sylvia, completely confused. A thought crossed her mind. Did Sylvia not recognize her? For a moment, everything was quiet in the forest. A strange crystal structure stood alone in the forest, glowing with energy. Deculayan watched from a distance. He recognized her immediately. She was from House Illide. The sight of her brought back a memory. He remembered 10 years ago when the Illides grew afraid of his and his father's power. He recalled how they used their soldiers to surround his family's home, threatening them. He couldn't understand it. After everything that happened, how could she not remember him? Just then, the small tower near Sylvia shattered into pieces. He felt a sudden pull. It was like his mana was being sucked away somewhere. He turned and saw what was happening. Epherene had her hand on a large stone monument, and it was glowing with a blinding blue light. Epherene was completely focused on the glowing monument. A voice from behind her suddenly demanded to know what she was doing. It was Sylvia. She was furious, accusing Epherene of stealing all the mana she had gathered. But Epherene didn't even seem to hear her. Sylvia couldn't believe it. The girl was acting like she wasn't even there. Watching from a distance, Deculayan realized what was happening. He stepped forward and called out to Sylvia, asking why she was pretending not to recognize him. Epherene was still lost in the flow of magic, completely unaware of the tension building behind her. Deculayan pressed on. He reminded her of how her family had threatened his, and asked if she was scared he'd come back to steal her spotlight. Suddenly, Epherene spoke, but not to Deculayan. She told Sylvia she didn't know her. Sylvia was stunned, furious that this girl was talking down to her. Epherene continued, saying that while she didn't know Sylvia, she knew her father. Sylvia had no idea what she was talking about. Epherene called him a cocky former noble. Then, her face twisting with anger, Epherene added that she heard he died. Suddenly, the other students started shouting, pointing up into the trees. High up on a branch, a figure was glowing with a powerful green aura. The girl glared down, furious. She demanded to know what Epherene had just said. She was absolutely furious, screaming for Epherene to repeat what she just said. Without waiting for an answer, she launched a powerful blast of green energy right at them. But Sylvia reacted instantly. She threw up a magical shield, bracing for the impact. The two spells collided with a massive explosion that shook the entire forest. The blast was so strong, it sent the other students flying. As the smoke started to clear, a voice called out, asking if anyone was hurt. The attacker was on the ground, but she was still trying to fight. Epherene held her back as she screamed that someone had dared to insult her father. Sylvia glared down, ready to end it. But then she stopped, her eyes widening. The attacker looked up too, wondering what was going on. A strange light had appeared out of nowhere. The strange light grew into a massive swirling vortex in the sky. It was dark and terrifying, pulling everything towards its center. The other students started screaming in terror. Sylvia stared up, her face pale. She realized it was a void. She knew exactly what created it. It was the spot where the two spells had crashed into each other. Now, it was pulling at everything around it with incredible force. Someone screamed that it was going to explode, but another student realized running wouldn't help. If it blew up, it would send sharp metal pieces flying everywhere. In that moment, everyone understood. They were all going to be taken out. The void pulsed with unstable energy, ready to burst. And then, it happened. The energy collapsed in on itself, but the blast never came. Someone had stepped in. It was Deculayan, using his own power to contain the explosion. Suddenly, everything went quiet. The terrifying void was gone. Epherene looked around, completely confused by the silence. He stood there, perfectly calm. All around him, the pieces of the explosion were frozen in the air, held in place by his magic. The students couldn't believe it. They had no idea when he'd even arrived. More importantly, they couldn't understand how he'd just frozen an explosion in time. The glowing blue shards began to move, swirling around him in a controlled, almost beautiful dance. The students watched, completely amazed. They recognized the spell he was using. It was telekinesis, but on a level they had never seen before. As students of magic themselves, they could see it wasn't just powerful, it was beautiful. Even Epherene and Sylvia were speechless. It was like they were enchanted, unable to look away from the incredible display. Then, with a final move, all the pieces came together, forming a huge, beautiful crystal on the ground. The danger was gone. With the danger handled, Deculayan announced that the lecture was over. He then ordered everyone to leave, except for the ones who caused the mess. Epherene's heart sank. She knew she was in serious trouble. The students involved were taken to an interrogation room. Inside, Deculayan and the university chairwoman were already waiting. Someone walked in and greeted them. Two more professors, Retlin and Relin, arrived. Retlin immediately started praising Deculayan and the chairwoman for being so dedicated. The chairwoman, Adeline Sigalian, welcomed them. She apologized for calling them in so suddenly before turning to Deculayan. With everyone gathered, one of the professors got straight to the point. He demanded to know who was responsible for attacking a lady from the noble house Illide. One of the professors started by insulting Epherene, calling her a lowly commoner with no name. It was clear he'd already decided who was at fault. The other professors laughed and agreed, praising Deculayan for cleaning up the mess. Deculayan knew they were just trying to get on his good side. He realized the outcome of this meeting was already set in stone. On one side, There was Sylvia, the daughter of the powerful Illide family, and on the other, Epherene, a fallen noble who was basically a commoner. It was obvious whose side the committee would take, but Decalaeon was determined to change the result because he could see something no one else could. A strange scarlet energy was pouring out of Epherene. The energy was getting stronger, and he was the only one who seemed to notice it. Thanks to his sharp eyesight, a system window popped up that only he could see. It was called Villain's Fate. The description was simple. The whole world wanted him gone, but whatever didn't take him out would only make him stronger. The system was telling him that his fate had officially begun. He understood perfectly. If he couldn't change the results of this meeting, his own end would come much sooner. The disciplinary meeting between the two new mages, Epherene and Sylvia, was about to begin. They sat alone in the middle of the huge, empty hall. One of the professors immediately started shouting. He accused Epherene of causing trouble and said someone could have been hurt if Decalaeon hadn't been there to clean up the mess. He demanded to know why she fought. Epherene just looked down at the floor and quietly said she couldn't tell him. The committee members were shocked by her response. She slowly rose to her feet. She kept her real reason to herself. She was sure the person truly responsible was watching from somewhere, so she couldn't say a word. Her mind flashed back to the words that had started everything. She remembered telling Sylvia she'd heard her father had passed away, and the look on her face. Epherene knew the truth. She'd been cleverly provoked, but she couldn't say a word about it, not in front of her enemy. She clenched her fists, trying to keep her anger under control. One of the professors started yelling at her from across the hall. He accused her of having an inferiority complex. He told her she should have remembered the difference between her position and Sylvia's. Epherene just stood there, taking it all in silence. Finally, someone asked Sylvia to speak. She explained that during class, she had accidentally destroyed Epherene's work, and that's what started the argument. The committee immediately twisted her words. They decided Epherene had made a huge fuss over a simple accident. One of them even suggested she had anger issues, calling her a lowly commoner. The calls for her expulsion grew louder. They all agreed that her behavior couldn't be ignored. Epherene felt a chill run through her. In that huge hall, surrounded by accusers, she was completely alone. Epherene felt like she was being buried under insults. Everyone was pointing their fingers at her, blaming her for everything, and she couldn't say a single word to defend herself. She had no one to protect her. The feeling was cold and sharp, like broken glass. And in her mind, there was only one person to blame for all of this. Decalaeon. One of the committee members spoke up, saying it seemed like everyone had made up their minds. But before they made a final decision, they turned to Decalaeon. They asked for his opinion, since he was there when it all happened. Epherene braced herself. She thought it was over. Decalaeon's voice filled the room as he addressed the committee. He asked a single, direct question about the incident, but he wasn't looking at Epherene. He turned to Sylvia and asked if she truly believed she had no fault in what happened. Sylvia was completely stunned. Decalaeon repeated the question, his voice cold and clear. He wanted to know if Sylvia truly believed she was blameless. The entire room was thrown into confusion. One of the professors looked completely stunned. Sylvia couldn't understand what Decalaeon was trying to do. Decalaeon explained his reasoning calmly. He told Sylvia she could have stopped what happened, but didn't. Then he took it a step further. He suggested that maybe her famous abilities just weren't good enough. Sylvia was speechless. After a moment, Sylvia admitted it. She confessed that she didn't stop Epherene on purpose because she wanted her to get in trouble. Epherene couldn't believe what she was hearing. Epherene was completely lost. She thought it was her fault, no matter what. So why was Decalaeon going after Sylvia instead of her? Another professor tried to jump in, arguing that the one who attacked was to blame. Decalaeon immediately shut him down, asking if the professor wanted to blame him instead, since he was the one who gave the lecture. The professor stammered, completely caught off guard. Epherene watched it all unfold. Decalaeon was taking on anyone who tried to defend Sylvia. She couldn't understand it. Why was he going to such lengths to protect her? Epherene was completely stunned. She couldn't wrap her head around it. Decalaeon was actually defending her. Suddenly, a woman on the committee slammed her hands down and told everyone that was enough. She argued that kids are supposed to fight and that this was just a simple squabble between new students. She suggested they let it go just this once. Decalaeon agreed. He announced there would be no punishment and told them both to leave. Epherene was floored. She had been ready to be expelled. The Decalaeon she knew would have kicked her out without a second thought. So why was he doing this? The question echoed in her mind. As Decalaeon walked away, one of the other professors praised him for his unique way of handling the situation, saying it was all for the good of the students. Decalaeon didn't even turn around. Epherene just stood there, watching his shadow disappear down the hall, completely lost. But Epherene wasn't finished. She finally spoke up, her voice shaking but full of resolve. She had one question for him. She asked if he remembered the last name Luna, and if he knew her dad. She continued, her voice filled with pain. She asked if he knew that her father suffered his entire life because of him, and that in the end, he didn't make it, and was walking away. But Epherene called out. She told him she had a question. He turned slightly. He didn't look surprised at all. In fact, he seemed to have been expecting this. Epherene looked him right in the eye. She demanded to know if he remembered the Luna family. Her hand was clenched into a fist. She asked if he remembered how her father's life was ruined because of him. But as she waited for an answer, a thought crossed her mind. What if he did remember? He might just take back his decision and punish her to protect himself. Still, there was another possibility. What if he didn't even remember her father? She realized that would be even more heartbreaking. Decalaeon's voice cut through the silence. He told her she didn't need to ask. He told her not to waste her potential on things that happened in the past. And with that, he was gone, leaving Epherene standing alone in the empty hall. She just stood there, completely silent, trying to make sense of it all. And then it clicked. She was sure of it now. Decalaeon remembered her and her father. That had to be the only reason he helped her. He must have felt responsible for what happened. Her hand tightened into a fist. She figured that's why he decided to step in and defend her. But that led to another, more painful question. Was he helping her just because he pitied her? A wave of relief washed over Epherene. So he didn't forget. As long as he remembered her, that was something. She decided she was satisfied with that. At least for now, it was enough. At the same time, Deculin got a notification. The system informed him that he'd just overcome a death variable and earned 2 points of store currency. Miles away, 2 people were already discussing what happened. The driver, Giltheon, the head of the Illid family, told his passenger not to worry about that girl anymore. He explained that while Epherene Luna definitely had talent, she had already missed her chance to do anything with it. It all went back to something that happened 10 years ago, on the day of the Academy's aptitude exam. The memory went back 10 years. To a mage conducting an aptitude test on 2 young girls. He stared at the glowing orb, completely stunned by the results. He thought it was impossible, but the orb didn't lie. He announced that both of them had the talent to become an archmage. The girls were just as confused. To find 2 potential archmages from the same region was unheard of. She had no idea what was going on. See, an archmage is the highest rank a mage can possibly reach. They're considered legends, being so powerful that not even the emperor can touch them. Their names are forever written into the continent's history. But there's a strict tradition. Only 3 people can be an archmage in any single era. It doesn't matter what kind of magic they use or where they come from. That is the one unchanging rule. At that time, 2 of the 3 seats were empty. However, one of them was already unofficially claimed by Adeline, the chairwoman of the magic tower. That meant there was really only 1 spot left. Sylvia realized what this meant. She, the heir to the powerful Illidi family, and Epherene, from a much smaller house, would have to compete for that single remaining spot. She didn't even need her father to say it out loud. She knew exactly what he was telling Epherene's dad. Give up on your daughter's future. That was the day Sylvia understood the real reason the Illid family came down so hard on the Lunas. They were a force that couldn't be argued with. It was all because of her. They did it all just to make sure she would become the archmage instead of Epherene. But becoming an archmage wasn't just their goal. It was her own wish, her destiny. That's when Epherene looked her right in the eye. She asked if Sylvia was afraid of her catching up. Sylvia just scoffed. She insisted it wasn't about talent. She was just unlucky. As they drove, Sylvia's father told her not to worry about Epherene. The real person she needed to be careful of, he warned, Deculin. He reminded her that Deculin wasn't a simple man. He might seem stuck now, but he was called a genius when he was young and could soar at any moment. Sylvia already knew her father was right. She knew because Professor Deculin had seen right through her trap. She remembered that moment perfectly. She had used her magic to make Epherene's mana vanish. She'd set it up to explode on contact. The bigger the incident, the more trouble Epherene would be in. But Deculin saw through her entire plan immediately. He figured it out, even though she had checked the room to make sure no one was watching with magic. Sylvia couldn't get it out of her head. Deculin knew she was the one who set the trap, but instead of saying so, he forced everyone to compromise. His message to her was clear. He knew everything, and she had to go along with him. It was a threat she had no choice but to accept. He had her completely cornered. She used to think he was just an arrogant man whose talents were only slightly above average. But now, she didn't know what to think. Just what kind of man was he? A few days later, at Deculin's manor, Deculin finished getting dressed. He spoke into a device, telling someone named Roy that he was ready and would be down soon. Moments later, his car pulled away from the estate. As he rode in the car, Deculin thought about what happened. He knew he'd made the right choice supporting Epherene. Because of it, he had removed one of the many things that could get him eliminated and even gain some store currency. He remembered a social event from a while back. He never would have guessed that the young woman who'd asked that question was actually Epherene. Back then, she was almost certainly hostile toward him, which explained a lot. He knew Sylvia might hold a grudge against him for what he did, but he had no choice. He had to deal with the most immediate threat to his own survival. Putting that aside, he really didn't like social events. He would much rather avoid them, but he couldn't pass up an opportunity to gain more store currency. A new side quest appeared. Attend the Flower of the New Year event. He needed at least 5 store currency to access the shop. So his plan was to find any important people at the event and see what he could get. The car pulled up to a massive, fancy-looking building. He had arrived. As soon as he stepped out, the staff bowed deeply and welcomed him. The place was packed with people, all talking and laughing. He scanned the room. It was full of high-ranking nobles, many of whom he recognized from his time as a game developer. But one person in particular stood out. It was Ehelm, a man the original Deculin had apparently modeled himself after. Seeing all these important people confirmed it. Coming here was the right move. That's when he noticed someone approaching. An older nobleman walked right up to him, a big smile on his face. He greeted Deculin warmly. He explained that his own son was taking Deculin's class at the university. The attention just kept coming. Another noble rushed up, grabbing his arm and telling him how much he'd always wanted to meet him. Deculin hated being touched. He immediately regretted coming to this party. But then he overheard a conversation nearby. Someone was talking about a person named Ganesa. The old noble tried to invite him for dinner, but Deculin wasn't even listening anymore. He just walked right past him. He knew that name. Ganesa was a key character in the game's story. Getting to know her now would be a huge advantage. He started looking through the crowd, trying to figure out where her name had come from. That's when he saw her down on the stairs. He knew this was his chance, and he had to take it, and scanned the crowd, convinced that Ganesa had to be somewhere nearby. And then he saw her, standing on on the floor above. It was a woman with red pigtails, wearing an adventurer's outfit. That was definitely her. He started to head towards her, but a voice suddenly called out from the crowd. A man was walking right up to him, calling him Professor Dekulin. The timing couldn't have been worse. He knew exactly who it was. Ehelm, an imperial mage of the 4th highest rank. Ehelm walked closer with a smug look. He sarcastically said it was an honor to be remembered, then immediately asked how Dekulain's research was going, hinting that he'd heard some rumors. When Dekulain asked what he meant, Ehelm laid it out plain and simple. The rumor was that his research hadn't progressed at all in the last 3 years, and people were starting to question his ability. Dekulain could see right through him. Ehelm was just trying to get a reaction. Turns out, this guy was Dekulain's peer back in university. He even offered his help with a smug look on his face. They used to be close, but that all changed when Dekulain got the head professor position that Ehelm wanted. The jealousy had been eating at him ever since. The original Dekulain might have been bothered, but to Kim Woojin, these insults were pointless. After all, what Ehelm was saying was the truth. But then, something clicked in his mind. Ganesa. He looked over to where he'd seen her. The spot was empty. She was gone. Ehelm was still laughing, telling him his arrogance was why no one liked him. Dekulain was furious. He'd lost his chance to meet Ganesa because of this guy. Dekulain walked right up to Ehelm and called his name. Ehelm turned, asking what he wanted. He'd had enough. He told Ehelm to shut up and get lost, calling him a rotten bastard. Ehelm fell to the floor, completely stunned. He couldn't believe what he'd just heard. Dekulain didn't waste another second on him. He had to find Ganesa, and he had to do it now. He was frustrated. The whole plan was ruined. Inside, people started to wonder where Professor Dekulain had gone. He'd managed to find a quiet spot outside. Even after getting rid of Ehelm, there were just too many people trying to talk to him. This was exactly why he hated these events. That's when a voice called his name. He turned, and there she was, Ganesa. She asked if he was looking for her. He was just trying to get away from the party, but this was perfect. The bigger question was, did the original Dekulain and Ganesa already know each other? Ganesa laughed. She told him to stop pretending he just got lost. She knew he had something to say. He apologized for a mission they'd worked on. He'd already returned the money, so he asked if they could just move on. It was clear they had some kind of business history, but Ganesa corrected him. She wasn't sorry, because she couldn't bring him a talented magic user, but because she didn't. She admitted she got attached to the child and couldn't bring herself to hand them over. And just like that, he understood everything. The original Dekulain, unable to make any progress himself, had tried to use a talented child to cover up for his own failures. Ganesa told him she had one last thing to ask. Dekulain just told her to go ahead. She looked him right in the eye and asked how long he planned on living the way he had been. The question seemed to stop him. He quietly repeated it to himself. He thought about the man he used to be. The old Dekulain would listen to anyone who flattered him, even if they were useless. His actions destroyed the trust of everyone around him. He hurt countless people just to protect his own reputation. But that was the past. He turned and told her that from now on, he was going to live differently. Ganesa was stunned. She admitted she never expected that kind of answer. She was sure he was going to try and get rid of her. Ganesa explained that she was worried because she'd run away from a secret mission, but Dekulain just told her that her concern was unnecessary. He thought to himself about how crazy it would be to go after her. Ganesa was a top-class fighter. Trying to take her out would be a death wish. He wasn't sure what the original Dekulain would have done, but he knew Ganesa was a special character, strong enough to take someone down with a single strand of her hair. Her skills were invincible body and master of all martial arts. She was a fighter who had reached the absolute peak of physical strength. He figured that the original Dekulain couldn't stand people like her. If he hadn't taken over this body, Ganesa would probably already be gone. Ganesa was completely thrown off. She couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. But for Dekulain, the night was a success. He'd made the connection he wanted. He saw no reason to stay any longer. He told her he was heading back and that she shouldn't worry. Ganesa was surprised he was leaving so early. As he walked away, Ganesa called out to him, still not believing it. She asked if it was really okay, if no one was going to come after her. Without even turning around, Dekulain just said that such methods were classless. She was just left standing there, completely stunned by his answer. As he walked on, he thought about it. With his family's power, he could have easily used the Adventurers Guild to make her life difficult. But he knew that would just create new problems that could lead to his own end. That's when a message popped up from the system. He had avoided a threat to his life and gained store currency. He stopped in his tracks, completely caught off guard. He suddenly understood. The system didn't say he'd overcome the threat, but avoided it. The entire conversation with Ganesa had been a hidden trap. Looking back at the party, it hit him. There wasn't a single place in this world where he could let his guard down. Far from the party, a young adventurer named Rayleigh was getting impatient. She demanded to know how much longer they were going to stay. She was talking to Julie, who shot back that she never wanted to come in the first place. When Rayleigh tried to get her to move, Julie just refused. Rayleigh looked on, worried by her friend's mood. Julie's face darkened. She suddenly asked how things were with that person lately. When Rayleigh asked who she meant, Julie specified it was Professor Dekulin. Rayleigh admitted she was worried, mentioning all the rumors she'd heard. The very mention of his name brought up an image of him walking away from her. She was silent, but the pain was obvious. Finally, she answered. Things were not good. Not good at all. Rayleigh quickly tried to quiet her down, worried that someone might overhear them. But Julie wasn't paying attention to her friend anymore. She had spotted Dekulin down below, heading for the exit. He didn't even look up at her. He just kept walking, leaving the party behind without a word. His sudden exit didn't go unnoticed. People started whispering, surprised that Declan, a man who loved social events, was already leaving. They pointed out that he hadn't even spared a glance for his own fiancée on the way out. The nobles concluded that the rumors about their bad relationship must be true, and Julie heard every single word. Because Declan left the party earlier than anyone expected, people immediately started talking. They assumed it was because of his bad relationship with Julie. But of course, Kim Woojin had no idea about any of this. A notification popped up. He completed the side quest just by attending, and now he had 4.5 store currency. He was almost there. If you liked the story, subscribe for the next part. Thank you. A week had passed since the flower of the New Year social event. He was back at the Yuckline estate. On top of his daily magic practice, he started working out. He realized his stamina was seriously lacking. The reason was simple. He had almost gotten himself killed doing something reckless. It happened a few days ago. He had tried to push his magic too far, and the backlash was immediate. He hit the floor, coughing up blood. He knew a normal mage wouldn't have survived that. It was probably his Iron Man attribute that kept him alive. The goal was to engrave a new skill, fire control, on top of his existing telekinesis. He needed it to get better at controlling metal. The idea was to implant the core of one magic inside another. It was a shortcut, a way to learn new skills much faster. But it was also incredibly dangerous. After realizing the strain it was putting on his body, he knew he had to get stronger physically. So he started a new morning routine. He pushed himself hard every single day. But soon enough, it was time to go to work. He got to his office as the head professor. He immediately asked his assistant, Alan, what was going on. Alan explained that a statement had arrived from the Magic Tower. The letter was from the Magic Tower's Committee for Professors. It was a notice for an audit hearing. In 6 months, they would be reviewing all of his research, and he needed to prepare the documents. This was bad. An audit meant the original Decalane's research had been going nowhere long before he took over his body. He remembered that in the game, Decalane's main role was always professor. He started to think that his main quest might depend on him keeping that title. So if he lost his job, he'd also lose any chance of ever going back home. He knew what he had to do. He had to search the original Decalane's laboratory for anything that could help him. He opened the door and stepped inside. The laboratory was a complete disaster. Books and papers were scattered everywhere, covered in a thick layer of dust. It was clear no one had been here for a long time. He knew the original Decalane was a perfectionist. He would never have let his lab get this messy on his own. Then, something caught his eye. A heap of trash in the corner looked completely out of place, almost like it was put there on purpose. He suspected it was hiding something. He didn't know who was to blame, but it was the perfect way to stop Decalane's research cold. Someone had deliberately done this. But whoever it was didn't count on one thing. He had just learned telekinesis. He raised his hand, and the junk started to float into the air. Sure enough, there was a single book hidden underneath. He pulled it right to his hand. The book was filled with complex symbols. It looked like the original researcher had encrypted everything to keep it safe. But for him, that wasn't a problem. He activated his comprehension skill, and the encryption shattered instantly. His eyes glowed as the information flooded into his mind. A blast of golden light erupted from the book, throwing him back. The light was blinding. He could tell immediately that this research was simply incredible. Even his own skills were reacting to its brilliance. But as he looked closer, he saw the problems. The research was incomplete. Pages were torn, sections were missing, and some of the logic was just plain wrong. Still, even with all its flaws, the work was so groundbreaking that it triggered one of his special abilities. That's when he remembered the name of the student who hated him so much. Epherene Luna. This had to be her father's work. It all clicked into place. He realized Epherine's father must have tried to hide this research from the original Declan. This was the source of the Luna family's grudge. And because of the man he now was, Epherene had lived a brutal life. He clenched his fist. He wasn't going to let this go. He decided he would complete the research himself. With his comprehension skill, it was possible. And when it was done, he would add her name to the paper. He'd list her as a co-author. After all, he needed accomplishments for himself, so he couldn't give her all the credit. Elsewhere, at a cafe on campus, a group of students were having a serious meeting. One of them insisted that the commoners had to stick together. She pointed out that there were only 30 of them in the class, and if they didn't unite, they'd all suffer for it. The other student turned to Epherene, looking for her agreement. Epherene just flinched, thinking about how she used to be a noble. She took a sip of her drink and sighed. Without a home or land, she figured she wasn't much of a noble anyway. But the red-haired girl wasn't taking no for an answer. She leaned in and told Epherene that she absolutely had to be there. She explained that Epherene was the representative of the commoners now. Epherene couldn't help but laugh to herself. Her, a representative? That's when another student brought up a serious problem. To make a club, they needed a supervising professor, and he didn't think any of them would approve of the commoners gathering together. The red-haired girl nodded. That was the biggest hurdle they faced. They started listing their options, but it was hopeless. One professor was famous for sucking up to nobles, and another one would turn away the second he saw a commoner. And of course, there was no way Professor Decalane would ever help them. As the others talked, Epherene was completely distracted by the cake on the table. She was really hoping no one else would eat it, but her train of thought was shattered when the red-haired girl slammed her hands on the table. She shouted that they should just ask Professor Decollin to help them. The other students immediately turned to Epherene, expecting her to be the one to do it. She was horrified. One of the students tried to convince her, pointing out that Decollin was sort of fair. After all, he looked down on everyone equally, nobles and commoners alike. The red-haired girl agreed, adding that since Decollin helped Epherene avoid punishment, she must have caught his eye. But Epherene shot that down immediately, insisting he wasn't some great person. She couldn't believe how the conversation was turning. The last thing she ever wanted was to get involved with Decollin. She tried to get away, telling them she absolutely couldn't do it, but they kept pushing, telling her to just think it over. Epherene argued back that if she did it, it would only make things worse. Then, she suddenly stopped. The red-haired girl looked confused by the sudden change. Her friend Julia noticed her sudden silence and asked what was wrong, but Epherene couldn't answer. She was frozen, staring at something just behind them. Then a cold voice cut through the air, telling them to move. Epherene's face went pale. She looked up, and her heart stopped. It was Professor Decollin. He was the last person on Earth she ever wanted to run into. Her friend Julia peeked out from behind a door, wished her good luck, and then disappeared. Epherene was furious. She'd been left all alone to deal with him. Decollin started to walk away, not even looking back. Epherene took a shaky breath, gathering her courage. She finally called out his name, stopping him in his tracks. She told him she wanted to make a club. Then she bowed low, holding out the papers and explaining that she needed his signature for it. She quickly promised that they wouldn't bother him at all. She just knew he didn't usually approve of clubs with commoners, so she wanted to ask him directly. Epherene hated this. She didn't want anything to do with Decollin, but she knew her friend had a point. The other professors would never cooperate with them. It was better to get this over with now, instead of dealing with the problem forever. She held her breath, just hoping he'd consider it. To her complete surprise, Decollin took the paper without a word and signed it. He told her to just send the details to his office later. Epherene was so stunned, she didn't even know what to say. He handed the signed document back to her. She just numbly took it. She stared down at the paper. He had actually signed it. As Decollin walked away, Epherene couldn't wrap her head around it. The most difficult professor in the university had just agreed without any argument. Her friend was thrilled, amazed that she'd actually pulled it off. But Epherene wasn't celebrating. This was just like before, at the disciplinary committee. She just couldn't understand it. Why was the man who ruined her family suddenly being so nice to her? Later, in the lecture hall, the day's lesson was about to begin. It was on the understanding of pure elements. Decollin began the lecture, explaining that elements were the foundation of all magic. He said many mages still didn't grasp the difference between pure elements and other kinds of magic. But Epherene wasn't listening. She just stared at him from her desk, trying to figure out why he was suddenly being so helpful. She wondered if it was guilt, or maybe, she thought, it was some kind of but she couldn't accept either reason. This was the man who drove her father to his end. Any kindness he showed her now just felt fake. She believed if he truly felt bad about what he did, he would reveal his true self to the world and repent for his crimes. She clenched her fists on the desk, lost in her anger. Her friend sitting next to her noticed and quietly asked if she was all right. Epherene was startled out of her thoughts. Her friend leaned closer, pointing out that she didn't seem to be doing well. Her friend tried to reassure her, telling her not to worry about what some other people were saying. But Epherene was completely confused. She had no idea what her friend was talking about. That's when Epherene understood. She saw the other nobles staring right at her, whispering about the vermin in their class. One of them looked at her with pure disgust. Epherene just had to laugh to herself. After that incident, she'd basically become a common enemy of the nobles. Julia leaned over and told her it was all right. She said those students were always like that, and they should just focus on the lecture. At the front of the class, Decollin continued his lesson. He explained that every magic circle they'd ever used had a reason behind each and every stroke. The students listened carefully. They'd all heard that Decollin's lectures were different. He held up a glowing magic circle to prove his point. He explained that a simple fire spell could change color just by adding 2 strokes, because those lines decided the color of the flames. A book materialized in his hand as he announced what they were going to learn that day. The topic was called Flowing Fire, and Epherene's thoughts weren't wrong. The original Decollin used his lectures to show off, but the man standing there now, Kim Woo-jin, was different. His lessons were like art, a beautiful display of mana that showed a deep understanding of magic. This came as a huge shock to all the new students in the room. It was especially surprising for Sylvia, a genius who had long ago lost any joy in learning. But now, she was completely captivated, her heart pounding with excitement. Decollin continued his lesson. He held up a glowing blue circle, explaining that it was the standard magic for summoning water. Then, he showed them what would happen if they combined it with a fire magic circle. The 2 spells merged, creating something entirely new and powerful. The students watched, their eyes wide. Epherene couldn't believe it. A stream of pure fire was flowing right in front of them. It was moving just like water, something that should have been impossible. One of the students just stared, completely stunned. She had never expected his lectures to be so focused on theory. The thing is, most mages who were called geniuses just used their gut feelings to cast spells. For them, theory was just a basic starting point. If every mage focused only on theory, all their magic would end up looking exactly the same. It made sense. Spending all your time on theory meant you didn't have enough time to actually learn and practice magic. Trying to understand every single spell that way was just slow and would get in the way of real training. He called it the paradox of magic. He explained that to become an elite, a mage had to have great intuition. But the problem was, those same elites could never explain what intuition actually was. She realized that for someone whose genius was being questioned by everyone, a lecture this focused on theory was a huge risk. It should have been impossible for him to pull it off. The lecture was completely different from what the rumors said. Back at the Magic Tower dorm, even Epherene had to admit it. She'd never focused so hard on a lecture in her entire life. She couldn't stop thinking about it. When Epherene got back to her room, she found her door covered in insults. She was getting sick of these pranks. She figured it had gotten worse ever since the incident with Sylvia. That's when she noticed something else stuck to the door. It was a sponsorship certificate. She almost fell for it, but quickly decided it had to be a fake. After all, who would sponsor her? She was hated by the Iliad household and by Decalayan himself. But then, she had an idea. If she reported the fake certificate, she could probably get a reward for it. So she headed straight for the Magical Administration office. She walked right in to file her report. But when the official checked it, it was real. Her eyes went wide. The sponsorship was completely legitimate. The staff member calmly told her that the seal was real, meaning the certificate wasn't a fake. Epherene couldn't accept it, shouting that it had to be a lie. But then it hit her. The sponsorship was actually real. She was so happy she thought she had to be dreaming, even pinching her own cheeks to try and wake herself up. A second later, she snapped back to reality, looking around nervously to see if anyone saw her outburst. But then a new thought popped into her head. What if people found out she suddenly had 100,000 elm? The joy was gone, replaced by pure panic. She started packing an emergency bag, regretting ever going to the administration office. She started getting suspicious of everyone, even the staff member. She remembered the woman having a weird look on her face and wondered if she was already planning to take the money. She realized she should have been way more careful. She'd pinched herself so hard, she actually fell onto the floor. The pain was sharp and real. But even so, she still couldn't believe it. This wasn't a dream. It was really happening. A single tear ran down her face. She started to cry, but this time, she was smiling. After all this time, someone had finally noticed her talent. She looked around her small room. Maybe the world wasn't so bad after all. It was time to pull herself together. With the sun shining brightly, she made a promise to herself. From now on, she was going to try even harder. Meanwhile, at the Euclid Manor, someone was asking if a report they just received was true. It was Yuriel. She confirmed that Decalayan was headed to the shot and jewel auction and had probably already arrived. She started to panic. He'd spent 10 million elm last year, and she was terrified of what kind of trouble he was planning to cause this time. She swore she wouldn't forgive him if he caused any more problems. At that exact moment, a car pulled up to the auction house in the city of Tutin, but Decalayan wasn't there to cause trouble. He was thinking about how he could finally buy something he had been searching for. He walked into the auction house, ready to get what he came for. He remembered when he first started using telekinesis. He realized he needed a special kind of metal to make up for his lack of raw talent. The item he was using now, made of wood steel, was only ever meant to be a temporary fix. He needed something better. He was sure that the item he needed would finally be available at the auction today. But when he walked into the VIP room, he saw someone was already there. It was a woman in armor, and she noticed him immediately. She was clearly not expecting to see him. She stood up, turning to face him. The two of them stood there in silence. The air in the room was thick with tension. Decalayan was the first to speak. He greeted her calmly, saying he was surprised to see Julie at the auction. But Julie didn't return the greeting. Instead, she immediately brought up a rumor she'd heard, that he'd sent 2 young mages to the disciplinary committee. Deculayan wasn't fazed at all. He just asked if she was going to try and blame him for that too. Julie didn't answer right away. She accused him of crushing the dreams of rookie mages who were just starting out. She warned him that his past sins would eventually come back to haunt him. She told him not to make the same mistakes again. Her expression was filled with resolve. She told him this was the last piece of advice she could ever offer him. Deculayan just stood there, letting her words hang in the air. He understood what she meant immediately. Those weren't just words of advice. This was her way of saying goodbye. She was cutting off her relationship with him for good. As it turns out, Deculayan was perfectly fine with her decision. He felt the exact same way. He admitted she was beautiful, but he had no intention of getting married in this new life over something so uncertain. Besides, he knew from experience that she was a huge risk. If he made one wrong move, he could end up dead on their wedding day. With that, her decision was made. She turned and walked away, and he just watched her go. But then he realized something was off. The Julie he knew would never attend an auction. He wondered why she was really here. When he questioned her about it, she got completely flustered. She couldn't believe he thought she came all this way just for him. She insisted he was full of himself, and that she was only here to buy something she needed. Deculayan just told her to calm down. Julie huffed, insisting she understood him perfectly fine. He actually found her reaction kind of cute. But then, a strange feeling hit him. He couldn't figure out what he was feeling. Just a moment ago, he was reminding himself how much of a threat she was. He started to worry. Was he being infected by the original Deculayan's emotions? He'd been so careful to keep his own personality from being corrupted by the character. Just then, an announcement echoed through the hall. The auction was about to begin. He decided he was probably wrong. It wasn't like his heart started racing whenever he saw her. Yeah, he was just overthinking things. He put it out of his mind and focused on the stage. He sat there, his eyes fixed on the stage. The auction was starting. The auctioneer kicked things off by presenting the first item, a fancy vase from the East. He went on about its elegant design, made by a master artisan, but as Deculayan watched, The vase started glowing with a golden light. He recognized that light. It was the sign of a wealthy magnate, something he'd read about in Epherene's research papers. The light was only getting stronger, which meant the vase was far more valuable than it looked. The bidding started immediately, and the price shot up past $1 million in just a few seconds. One guest raised the price to $1.5 million. But then Dekulin, guest 777, made his move. He bid $2.5 million. And just like that, the vase was his. He knew he'd made the right call. The golden light hadn't faded at all, which meant the vase was worth even more than he paid. With plenty of money in the bank, he saw it as a smart investment. The system showed his balance was still over 200 million elne. He had more than enough to keep going. The auctioneer announced the next sale. A ring sold to guest 777 for $3 million. Then a pair of scissors for over $2 million. And a necklace for more than $4 million. He bought them both without hesitation. The crowd was starting to talk. People couldn't believe guest 777 was buying everything. That's when someone recognized him. It was Professor Dekulin. Watching from her seat, Julie sighed. She thought he was just a pathetic man, desperate for attention. She couldn't understand why he'd waste so much money just to show off. He was nothing like her. She decided to just ignore him. His actions didn't matter. After all, she was only here for one thing, to get an item called Winter's Fire. The auctioneer slammed his gavel, announcing it was time for the final item. He told the crowd it was an ore so rare it was almost impossible to find. He pulled back the cloth, revealing the legendary item known as Winter's Fire. Its true name was the Snowflare Stone. A massive, glowing blue crystal sat on the stage. Dekulin watched it, his expression serious. Julie's eyes were locked on it. This was the one thing she had come here for. The Snowflare Stone was one of the 10 rarest metals in the entire world. It was mostly used to forge powerful swords and other weapons. The stone was special because it held both heat and cold energy at the same time. The only thing better for making a sword would be something legendary, like dragon bones. Dekulin knew this was the best material he could possibly get for what he had planned, but Julie felt the exact same way. She was determined to get her hands on that stone. The bidding started, and the price shot up instantly. 10 million, 20 million, then 30 million from bidder 1089. For a second, Julie thought she had it. A smile spread across her face as the auctioneer was about to close the bid, but then a new offer came in. Guest 777 bid 31 million. Julie's heart sank. She whipped around in her seat. She'd heard that number, 777, called out all day long. She couldn't just ignore this. She got more and more angry, wondering why he was getting in her way. And that's when she realized who it was. It was Dekulin, and he just sat there, looking completely unfazed. Julie bid 32 million. Dekulin immediately countered with 33. The people watching started to whisper. They assumed he was trying to buy the Snowflare Stone as a gift for his fiancée. But one of them was confused. If it was a gift, why not just let her buy it? Dekulin heard them and looked completely annoyed. That's when it finally hit him. He'd been so focused on the auction, he completely forgot he was bidding against Julie. He knew a knight like her would want the stone badly. If he took this from her, she would hold a serious grudge, but he couldn't back down. He needed it too. This was the first time the stone had been available in 3 years. Both of them knew there was no telling when they'd get another chance. He knew winning could be risky, but for the special item he needed to make, it was a risk he had to take. Both of them stared at the glowing Snowflare Stone. Dekulin's mind was made up. He had to have it, no matter what. The auctioneer made his last call. The final bid was 42 million elne, and the winner was guest number 777. Dekulin sat perfectly still, having won the stone. The room was filled with excited whispers. Everyone knew Professor Dekulin got it, calling it the most intense auction ever, but they had it all wrong. They thought he was working so hard just to give his fiancée a gift. Julie just kept her head down, completely defeated. To her, this was just like last year. He had done it again. She never wanted any of it. She remembered him offering her piles of jewels and expensive dresses, promising he'd do anything for her. But for Julie, the day of their engagement was the worst day of her life. The look on his face said it all. He was showing off, trying to prove how great he was, as if that would be enough to win her over. But surrounded by all that treasure, she didn't feel impressed. She just felt humiliated. She looked him right in the eye, her patience gone. She told him he already knew what she really wanted from him, and it wasn't any of this. So she walked out, ruining her own engagement on purpose. But that wasn't how things ended. It wasn't the end of the story at all. Turns out, her own sister ended up falling for Dekulin. People whispered that she was promised a captain knight position in his order as a reward. Julie knew exactly who was spreading the rumors about her sister. It was his way of trying to ruin her name. She thought he was a fool if he believed these little games would ever make her come back to him. She clenched her fist. He was someone she could never love, no matter how hard she tried. And now, here at the auction, he was doing it again. She turned around and froze. Dekulin was standing right there. He just looked at her calmly and asked if she also wanted the Snowflare Stone. That was the last straw. She snapped, demanding to know how long he was going to keep insulting her. But instead of fighting back, he just said 2 words she never expected to hear from him. He apologized. Julie was speechless. The apology caught her completely off guard. Without another word, Dekulin turned and walked away. She just stared after him, completely stunned. Her mind was racing. Why would he apologize? The Dekulin she knew gloated about winning the Snowflare Stone. Not said he was sorry. Just then, a voice called out her name. It was her older sister, Josephine. She was waiting by a car and told Julie to get in. Miles away, another car was driving through the night. Inside, Deculain thought about what had just happened. He knew Julie was angry he'd bought the stone, but he was surprised the system's death variable didn't show up. His apology had changed something. Deculain arrived back at his mansion. The staff welcomed him, but his mind was still on Julie. He wondered just how awful the original Deculain must have been for her to want him gone. He immediately noticed the nervous look on their faces and asked if something was wrong. A butler stepped forward and explained that his sister, Yuriel, was home. And sure enough, she was waiting for him at the top of the stairs. Deculain looked up and saw her standing at the end of the hall, a suitcase next to her. She walked right up to him, her voice sharp with anger. She demanded to know if he'd spent the money that was supposed to pay for the mines. Deculain realized he hadn't been paying close enough attention to the household finances. He tried to calm her down, promising that what he bought would bring in a profit, but she was too furious to listen. He could see she was just using him as a place to dump all her frustration. This was not going to be an easy conversation. Tears streamed down her face as she asked if he really expected her to clean up all the messes he made. She told him they were already struggling, that she and the workers were doing everything they could just to stay afloat, and he just went and spent all their money. Her frustration boiled over into pure rage. She screamed at him, asking how he could possibly gamble with the money that belonged to their entire family. The force of her anger felt like a physical blow. That's when he felt it. The system was activating a skill called Villain's Fate, but he also saw a golden light shining through her red aura. Her own skill, Wealthy Magnate, was activating at the exact same time. The meaning was simple. If he couldn't get through the situation, he would die. But if he did, he'd bring in a lot of money. Deculain looked at her, completely unfazed by her rage. He told her not to worry, because he already knew how to solve the problem. But Yuriel wasn't having it. She screamed that she had to work herself to the bone just to make up for his mistakes. She told him she'd given up university and any chance at a normal life, all because of him. He just told her she never needed to do any of that. His simple answer only made her angrier. She accused him of doing nothing but wasting their family's money ever since their parents passed away. She couldn't believe he'd just thrown away 150 million in a single day. That's when Deculain calmly made an offer that changed everything. He told her he would give her the position of household head. Yuriel froze. She couldn't believe what she just heard. When she finally found her voice, she asked him to repeat himself. Deculain looked her straight in the eye and said it again. He was giving her the household head position. Turns out they weren't alone. Ganesa was listening in, and she was just as shocked as Yuriel was. Yuriel snapped out of it and accused him of talking nonsense, telling him not to lie. But Deculain was firm. He simply stated that he doesn't lie. To prove he was serious, Deculain offered to swear an oath. Yuriel was completely caught off guard. She asked if he meant the mage's oath, the kind that would end his life if he broke it. Deculain simply said yes. Yuriel couldn't understand why he would do something so extreme, or why it was happening so suddenly. She was so confused. She asked if he'd hit his head somewhere. Deculain just told her she could believe him or not. It was up to her. After a moment, Yuriel made her decision. She warned him that if this was a lie, she would make sure he paid for it. As she stormed out, she yelled back that she had to go fix the financial mess he'd just made at the auction. A message from the system appeared. He had overcome another death variable and earned some store currency as a reward. Deculain let out a quiet. He felt like a storm had just passed, and he was confident that giving her the position was the right move. He looked up, a sense of hope on his face. This was his plan, to change his fate, one small step at a time. As Yuriel walked away, she couldn't help but wonder. She thought about his promise to change, questioning if he really meant it this time. Just as the room fell silent, Deculain heard a voice. He looked up to find a woman perched in his window. It was Ganesa. She hopped down, calling herself an unwanted guest. She apologized, explaining that she was just passing by and saw the whole thing. She admitted it was all pretty shocking. Deculain didn't see any reason for her to be shocked. He told her Yuriel would do a much better job running the household. But then he hesitated. Ganesa looked at him with a serious expression. She started by saying Yuriel's full name, and then she told him the truth. Yuriel didn't have a single drop of Eucline blood in her at all. Deculain froze. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had no idea what she was talking about. But after the initial shock, his mind started working. He took a moment to think it all through. He finally spoke, admitting that he already knew Yuriel wasn't his biological sister, but the idea that she didn't share even a single drop of blood with the Euclines, that was something he'd never heard before. Ganesa seemed confused by his reaction. She reminded him that he was the one who had asked her to find out if they were related by blood. Deculain finally understood that this whole hidden story was real. He looked up, his expression clear. He said that even so, Yuriel is Yuriel. Blood didn't change a thing. Ganesa was genuinely surprised. She admitted she never thought he'd say something like that. Deculain replied that he was just as surprised to learn about this hidden background. Deculain told her he would make sure to protect the secret about his sister. Just as she was about to leave, Ganesa paused. She told him there was one more thing he needed to know. Ganesa warned him that a group called the Six Snakeheads had started to move. She explained that they were the leaders of the most infamous criminal groups on the entire continent. Each of them had a bounty worth millions. She said they were after the items he'd bought at the auction, and he needed to be on guard once they were delivered. She pointed out that his magical defenses had been weak lately, which was how she got in so easily. With that, she prepared prepared to leave. And just like that, she was gone, leaving behind a glowing piece of cloth. Deculayan let out a long, clearly exhausted by everything he'd just learned. He thought to himself that finding out about Yuriel's true background was information he never needed, knowing it didn't change a thing. After all, he wasn't the real Deculayan. Whether she shared his blood or not, his feelings for Yuriel would stay the same. He was going to treat her like family, no matter what. He made up his mind right then. Yuriel would always be Deculayan's sister. He decided he would just hide the truth from everyone. Meanwhile, far away from the mansion, Ganesa was telling her crew what she'd seen. She insisted that Professor Deculayan had changed so much. It was like a different person was wearing his skin. One of her men laughed, teasing her that she was just a sucker for handsome men. He joked that even a bad guy looks good when he says nice things. The other crewmate got angry, threatening to tear him apart for being ugly. The man protested that his grandma said he was handsome, but she just shot back that a hot guy must have been walking behind him. Another adventurer, a woman named Rayleigh, seemed to be taking it more seriously. She asked if this meant Deculayan actually had a human side to him now. Ganesa stretched, deciding that they didn't need to watch Deculayan anymore. She admitted she'd wanted to ask if he was still looking for a magic slave, but now it didn't seem like that was the case at all. With their mission over, she told her team it was time to head back. Before leaving, Ganesa gave her crew one last order. Everything they heard today was a secret, and they had to keep their mouths shut. With that, she and her team vanished in a flash of blue light. The next day, Deculayan was back at the University Magic Tower. He was in his office, looking over something new from the system. An upgrade was available to improve his mana quality, but it cost 10 store currency. He realized that while he could finally access the store, he didn't have nearly enough to buy anything important yet. The system store was a special feature in the game. It allowed him to use currency to strengthen not just himself, but any of the game's main characters. But the opportunities to use it were incredibly rare. The system warned him he would only get 6 chances before the end of the main story. The system explained the catch. He could only use the store once per level. On top of that, the cost would double every time his level went up. He knew he couldn't afford to waste this precious opportunity. He was already training constantly, working on his memory, physical strength, and blade control. He was integrating it all into his daily routine, but he knew it wasn't enough. Compared to the truly dangerous villains out there, he was still weak. For him to grow stronger, he needed to improve the quality of his mana. He decided he had to find a way to get the currency he needed. Just then, he heard a knock at the door. Deculayan told him to come in. A young man, looking a little nervous, stepped into the office and greeted the professor. He walked up to the desk, holding out a journal. He explained that he had just received it and thought the professor should see it right away. Deculayan took the journal. The young man warned him to be careful. It was today's issue of the Wizard Journal, and it apparently contained some bad news. He looked down at the journal. It was a wanted poster for a man named Lockhart, also known as the Wizard Killer. Deculayan knew that name. In the game, Lockhart was the biggest danger to any mage player in the early stages, but he wasn't worried. A small smile formed on his lips. For a normal mage, Lockhart would be a problem, but he wasn't a normal mage anymore. In fact, he hoped he'd run into him. This was the perfect chance to earn the store currency he needed. He told Alan not to worry about it. He was heading to the library, so Alan should head back. But just as Alan was about to leave, Deculayan stopped him. He asked Alan if he had any intention of becoming an assistant professor. Alan was stunned, but managed to say yes. Of course he did. Alan was stunned. He asked if Deculayan was really recommending him, reminding him that he'd always said he lacked talent. Deculayan explained that he was asking now because he'd seen how hard Alan worked. Before Alan could argue, Deculayan cut him off. He handed him a bangle with the Yuckline family emblem on it and told him to just keep up the good work. Alan was completely overwhelmed. He bowed and thanked the professor profusely. As Alan admired the bangle, Deculayan was thinking strategically. Alan was excellent at his job, and he couldn't afford to let him run off. He knew the original Deculayan had been so cruel that everyone else had quit. Alan was the only one who'd stuck around, and he was worried he might leave too. So he handed Alan some money. He told him to call it a day and go buy himself dinner. Alan tried to protest, saying it was too much, but Deculayan was already walking away. He didn't even look back. He just kept walking. Alan just stood there, speechless, clutching the money in his hands. Sometime later, Deculayan arrived at the staff-only library. He was there for one reason, Epherene Luna's paper. The research he'd found was about inventing pure elements, but it was full of mistakes. He knew he had to be the one to fix them. While he was at it, he figured he might as well look for some books on manipulation magic. That's when he noticed someone else was in the aisle with him. He turned and asked why she was inside the staff-only library. He was looking right at the debutante, Sylvia. Sylvia looked completely flustered. She was caught by surprise and didn't know what to say. Turns out, this whole situation started about 10 minutes earlier. Sylvia was at the front desk. The staff member was explaining to a professor that she was looking for study materials, even though this was an exclusive reading room. The professor on the other end, a man named Relin, just laughed. He said there was no need to restrict the successor of the Iliad family. He told the staff to let her use the room freely, since it was for her studies. So, the staff member turned back to Sylvia and told her she had permission to look around. Sylvia's hobby was studying old literature and languages. She'd come to this special reading room looking for a book that covered both, and she found one. It was a novel written in Ethanel, the language of the fairies. Since the fairies disappeared, books like this had become incredibly rare. That's why she was in a place she wasn't supposed to be. And of course, that's when Deculayan walked in. Catching her completely off guard, Sylvia froze, hearing a voice behind her. Of all people, It was Declan. She never expected to see him here. Declan looked down at her, his voice cold. He demanded to know why she was in a staff-only room. He threatened to call the disciplinary committee. Sylvia's mind was racing. She'd heard he never even came to the library. Trying to stay calm, Sylvia explained she was looking for a document. She told him she already had permission from Professor Relin. Declan wasn't impressed. He pointed out that meant the professor and the librarian had broken the rules. In that case, he said, they should be disciplined too. Sylvia was speechless. She didn't know what to say. Just then, the book in her hand began to glow. Before she could react, Declan reached out and took the book from her. Declan glanced at the cover. He told her she broke the rules just to find a romance novel written in ethanol. Sylvia was shocked. She stammered, asking how he could even read that language, then tried to explain her interest in literature. He handed the book back to her, saying he would let it slide this one time, but he warned her that if she came back without permission again, he would take disciplinary measures. He told her not to use the library just to show off her family's influence. He finished by saying she should just send someone else to borrow books for her. He would take disciplinary measures. He told her not to use the library just to show off her family's influence. He finished by saying she should just send someone else to borrow books for her. And with that, he walked away, leaving her standing there alone. Sylvia stood there, shaking. She felt completely humiliated. All she wanted was to understand fairies by reading novels written in their language. But as she thought about it, a question popped into her head. How did Declan know how to read ethanol? The thing is, ethanol is an incredibly difficult language. It doesn't have consistent rules, which is why almost no one can read it. Meanwhile, out in a dense forest, a group of students were chasing something through the trees. They were shouting directions, trying to keep it from getting away. It was some kind of practical training. They were working together, gathering plants and other magical items. Watching over them was Declan. He seemed impressed, thinking that for their first time out here, they weren't scared at all. He was actually proud of them. This place was called the Mountain of Darkness. It was located a short distance away from the university grounds. The mountain was a very important place for the magic tower. It served as a training ground for real-world experience and was full of rare magical ingredients. Because of this, it was also incredibly dangerous, filled with beasts and other threats. That's why the magic tower had protective barriers and always had a professor on duty to patrol the area. Another professor approached Declan. He explained that they still hadn't decided who would be on patrol duty for the week and asked for his suggestion. Declan immediately volunteered himself. The other professor was completely caught off guard. The professor was incredibly impressed, saying Declan was a great example for everyone else. But Declan knew his reasons for volunteering weren't so noble. And there it was. A side quest had just appeared. The Darkness of the Magic Tower, offering store currency and another reward. As night began to fall, he felt a strange energy pulling him from deep within the woods. He realized this must be why the system had just given him that side quest. He knew something was about to happen that would turn this place into something out of a horror story. With the training session over, the students started packing up. They said their goodbyes, getting ready to head back. 9 hours later, at a cafe near the Magic Tower, things were a lot more cheerful. Someone was admiring the desserts, saying they looked almost too pretty to eat. The table was covered in fancy treats, piled high with fruit and cream. It was Epherene. She was treating her friends, proudly telling them to dig in, since she now had 100,000 elm to spend. Her friends all cheered. It was a celebration. One of her friends mentioned she'd already submitted the plan to start a new club. She was worried not many people were signing up, but another friend told her not to worry. Then the conversation shifted. Someone brought up the training session at the Mountain of Darkness. Epherene confirmed that 50 people had volunteered, even though accidents happened there all the time. And just as she said that, a terrible feeling washed over her. Something was wrong. Suddenly, a sound cut through the air. Epherene and her friend froze, their celebration stopping instantly. They all heard it. Without hesitating, they decided to find out where the sound came from. The group took off, running down the dark streets toward the noise. Then they heard it clearly, a desperate voice crying out for help, coming from the direction of the mountain. But one of her friends suddenly yelled for everyone to wait. She screamed a warning directly at Epherene, telling her that something felt wrong about this. Epherene didn't listen. She just kept running, ignoring their pleas for her to stop. She finally reached the source of the voice. A woman with silver hair turned around, a strange smile on her face as she asked a question. Epherene found herself in a dark, twisted forest. She had no idea how she got there. Just a moment ago, she was on the cafe street. Then she remembered why she'd run off. Someone was desperately calling for help. She shouted into the darkness, promising she was coming to help. A voice called back, guiding her deeper into the woods. She finally found them, a small person huddled on the ground. She rushed over, asking if they were all right. It was a trap. Before she could react, a blast of dark energy slammed into her. Stunned, she looked up. The person she had tried to save was now standing over her. Just then, one of her friends who had followed her arrived on the scene. She immediately started gathering magic to fight back, but her attack never came. She froze, her eyes wide with absolute shock. But the person who arrived was the last one they expected to see. It was Declan. The student ran up to him, furious. She demanded to know how he could just attack a civilian like that. Declan just calmly told her to open her eyes and look again. He explained that what she was seeing wasn't a person, and just like that, the illusion shattered. The small, helpless person was gone, replaced by a terrifying monster. She was speechless. Deculain explained that she'd been caught in an illusion, a common trick used by demons. He told her not to interfere and to get lost. With a wave of his hand, he sent her flying backwards, far away from the danger. With everyone else cleared out, it was just him and the demon. The fight was about to begin. With the area clear, Deculain turned his full attention to the demon. He wasn't just defending anymore. This was a hunt. He could tell the creature was furious. It had just lost its meal. The demon lunged, moving so fast it was just a blur. But Deculain didn't even flinch. The demon's attack hit nothing but air. He rose into the air, looking down on the creature. That's when he saw the glowing core on its forehead. The demon's main weapon was illusions, but his mental defenses were just too strong. Its tricks were completely useless against him. He could feel his bloodline reacting. This was what he was made for. The demon could feel it. There was something about Deculain's bloodline that filled it with an uncontrollable rage. But Deculain felt it too. A cold fury was taking over. The system explained his Euclid attribute. It was an ancient power made for taking down demons, purifying the very air around them. But it came with a price. It made him far more aggressive. That power was now fueling a deep hostility inside him. The famous demon hunting legacy of his family was coming alive inside him. He had only one thought. This demon would not survive. The demon felt the pressure, the rage coming from Deculain, suffocating. It lunged forward in a desperate attack, but Deculain was already moving, ready to end this. The system confirmed it. He'd completed the side quest and earned an achievement for defeating his first demon. As he looked down at the dead creature with disgust, the system notified him that he had unlocked the Euclid attribute from his family's bloodline. But he knew this wasn't just a random attack. The appearance of this demon meant the real story was just beginning. He looked up, understanding the weight of what was coming. This was the signal he recognized from the game he created. The world was now running on its own, without a player to control it. The next morning, things were quiet at the university clinic. Epherene Luna slowly opened her eyes. She shot up in bed with a gasp. A nurse calmly told her she was awake. Epherene was completely lost. She asked what happened, only remembering being in the woods. The nurse started to explain. A demon had appeared in the mountains the night before. Epherene had been caught in its bewitching spell and passed out. Someone found her and brought her to the clinic. Because of the attack, the whole mountain was now shut down while the magic tower investigated. Then came the worst part. The person who saved her was Professor Deculain. Epherene couldn't believe it. Of all people, it had to be him. She quickly asked what day it was. The nurse told her she'd been unconscious for 36 hours. It was Wednesday, and that's when it hit her. She was late for her special lesson. Back in the classroom, the other students were already waiting. She sprinted all the way there, arriving completely out of breath. She had just barely made it. A voice called out to her. It was her friend, Julia, waving her over. Julia was worried, saying she'd visited her at the clinic. But Epherene brushed it off, joking that all the sleep had actually left her feeling great. Epherene then noticed the room was set up differently than usual. She asked Julia if she'd missed a notice, but her friend was just as confused. It seemed like some kind of special lesson was planned. Just then, Professor Deculain walked in. Following behind him was a teaching assistant, carrying a box of supplies. Epherene looked at the person standing next to Deculain, wondering who he was. Professor Deculain made an announcement before starting the class. He introduced the man as Alan, his new teaching assistant. The students immediately started whispering to each other. They couldn't believe it. Everyone knew Professor Deculain always preferred to work alone. They knew that becoming an assistant was a huge opportunity to build a career. It was a chance the old Deculain would never give to anyone. The realization hit Epherene hard. It was the reason her own father had been stuck as a researcher for so long. He was never given the chance to be an assistant. It just didn't make any sense. She couldn't figure out why Deculain would suddenly hire a mage that nobody had ever even seen before. Deculain then explained the day's lesson. It was a practical test, and they had exactly 3 hours to solve the task he was giving them. He started the timer. As the task began, the bracelet on Epherene's wrist started to glow. It was an inheritance from her dad. The bracelet on her wrist made her think of her father. She couldn't stop wondering what he had meant to Deculain. Why had Deculain been so cruel back then, refusing to give her dad even a single opportunity? And why was he suddenly being so different now, giving chances to others? None of it made sense. She tried to shake it off and focus on the task. She had to come up with a spell, and fast, but it was no use. Her mind was a mess of conflicting thoughts. Suddenly, a voice cut through the silence. One of the students, Sylvia, announced she was done. It had only been 25 minutes. Everyone was stunned. Finishing that fast was incredible, but they weren't surprised it was her. From the front of the room, Professor Deculain watched everything unfold without a word. Sylvia presented her work to the professor. She had created a lily that bloomed with a soft, magical light. Deculain looked it over and gave a simple nod. He told her it was perfect and that she could leave. She looked down at the flower, a small, proud smile on her face. As she turned to leave, she glanced back at the other students. Epherene was still hunched over her desk, completely stuck. Sylvia walked away with a calm, satisfied look, but Epherene was furious with herself, gritting her teeth. And with that, the first student left the classroom. Epherene felt the pressure mounting. She told herself she had to get this done. Soon after, Deculain's voice echoed again, dismissing 2 more students, Julia and Lehin. The room was getting emptier, and time was running out. Deculain's voice cut through the silence again, dismissing 2 more students by name. Then another one got up to leave. One by one, They were all finishing their tasks. Finally, one of the last students pointed out that the 3 hours were up. Class was over, but Epherene was still hunched over her desk, desperately trying to make something work. Everyone left. She was the only one remaining. A wave of panic washed over her. She'd failed. She pressed her head against the desk, trying to force an idea out. Anything. The thought of Sylvia's easy success made it so much worse. She wasn't just beaten. She was the only one who couldn't even complete the task. All her confidence was gone. She started to wonder if she was just stupid, if she just didn't have what it takes. She slumped over the desk, feeling completely defeated. Her dream of revenge felt like a joke. She was convinced she couldn't compete with anyone here. Suddenly, a voice cut through the silence, stating the exact time, 5 hours and 47 minutes. The voice then asked how long she intended on making him wait. Epherene looked up and froze. Professor Deculon was sitting at the front of the class. He'd been there the entire time. She couldn't process it. He was still here, hours after class had ended. He told her she'd had a breakdown over an easy assignment and failed to finish it. All she could do was apologize. He took a step closer. He told her it doesn't matter if people laugh at her or if they're ahead of her. He paused for a moment, as if choosing his next words carefully. He reminded her that the person she hated most was standing right in front of her. To get her revenge, he told her, she had to be cold and logical at all times. He said she'd never reach his level with such a weak mind. Then he turned and started to walk away. He glanced back one last time, telling Epherene that he was disappointed. He thought she was better than that, but his words didn't break her. They lit a fire. She looked at the pile of sand on the desk, the assignment she couldn't finish. She slammed her hands on the table. She wasn't giving up. As Deculon walked out of the classroom, his last words echoed in her mind. Her hand tightened into a fist. She gritted her teeth, asking herself why his disappointment should matter at all. She told herself she could do this, with or without his approval. Even with her nose bleeding from the strain, she poured every last bit of her energy into the task. She reached out, determined to finish it. She swore to herself she would see this through, no matter what it took, and stood alone, thinking about what just happened. He wasn't worried. He knew spending 6 hours on Epherene was a big investment, but it was necessary. He needed her to get stronger for what was coming. Turns out, a demon had recently appeared on the Mountain of Darkness. That was the signal. The main quest was about to start. He knew that when a great evil arrived, powerful heroes would rise to face it, and a much stronger Epherene would be one of them. Right now, she was mentally weak and didn't have the right instincts, but Deculon knew that once she got past that, her power would grow incredibly fast. Of course, that kind of power could become a threat to him, but he wasn't going to let that happen. To him, fate was just an excuse for people who gave up. He only believed in himself. He knew he was pushing her, but his pride would never let a beginner catch up to him that easily. That's when he heard something behind him. It was Epherene. She threw the door open and stormed out. She walked down the long, empty hall, heading straight for him. Deculon just watched her come, a small smile on his face. Then, right in front of him, a flower made of pure light began to bloom. He watched it form, not saying a word. He announced the time it took her, 6 hours and 25 minutes. The assignment was finally complete. He picked up his pen and started writing her evaluation. He noted that even though she finished, she still had all the classic weaknesses of someone who wasn't formally trained, but he wasn't finished writing. He added that the quality of her work was so good, it could honestly compete for first place. Just then, a notification popped up. The system confirmed a side quest was complete, and he'd earned 1 store currency. With that taken care of, Deculon decided it was time to head back to his residence. But as he was leaving, a voice called out his name. A huge man with long white hair was standing there, laughing. He called out a friendly greeting, saying it had been a long time. Deculon was not happy to see him. He couldn't figure out what this guy was doing here. This was Zeit von Bruggen-Freiden, a man known for his incredible strength. This was Zeit von Bruggen-Freiden, the current head of the Freiden family. He was also Julie's older brother. Turns out, he was the one who had pushed for the engagement between Deculon and Julie in the first place. And most importantly, the man was a monster in combat, ranked 3rd in initial strength, even stronger than Ganesa. Deculon's mind raced. He couldn't understand why a man with that much power would suddenly show up here. His thoughts immediately went to Julie's snowflare stone. A cold sweat ran down his neck. This was a death variable, a situation he hadn't planned for. He had absolutely no way to defend himself against this monster. Zeit's voice boomed, saying it was a pleasure to see him. He mentioned he'd heard rumors that Deculon and Julie weren't getting along, and that he'd been worried. So, Zeit suggested they all have dinner together this week to sort things out. Deculon knew it wasn't a request. For now, the man was being friendly, but that could change in an instant. Deculon knew he was trapped. He kept his composure and agreed to the dinner. Zeit let out a loud laugh, pleased with the quick decision. He clapped Deculon on the shoulder, explaining that he'd already prepared a special menu and arranged everything. It was all settled. Then his expression changed. The smile was still there, but it looked dangerous. He told Deculon he'd see him soon. As Deculon watched him leave, he realized the man hadn't even given him a chance to say no. No. It was more than that. Zeit had set up the entire conversation so that refusing was impossible from the start. He knew that for a man like Zeit, the family household came before anything else. Getting in the way of his plans would be a huge mistake. There was no way to cancel this appointment. The next day, at the Freiden household, an argument was breaking out. One person was shouting that they didn't want to go, while another demanded to know why they were so against it. Julie shouted that she wouldn't go. She insisted they both hated each other. And besides, she was too busy training the knights to waste time meeting him. Her brother, Zeit, just scoffed. He asked if she was really just sulking, because Deculayan had taken one little stone from her. Julie yelled back that it wasn't about that at all. From a distance, Deculayan watched the whole thing unfold. Zeit tried to reason with her, pointing out that Deculayan had bought special metal that could only be used for a weapon. He suggested it was probably for her, but Julie cut him off, furious. She declared that if Deculayan actually presented her with a sword, she would break off the engagement immediately. Zeit's expression hardened. The argument was over. A powerful energy flared around him. His voice dropped, and he warned Julie to think very carefully about her next words. She stood her ground, facing the full force of his anger without flinching. Zeit told her that her feelings were foolish. He reminded her that there was no place for emotions in politics. He asked if she had feelings for someone else, but she quietly admitted there was no one. Zeit couldn't understand. He asked if this was about Deculayan's reputation, but she insisted it wasn't. He demanded to know the real reason for her refusal. With that, he turned away. He ordered her to be on time for the meeting, saying they would settle everything then. Julie walked away, defeated. Her knight, Veron, followed close behind her. Her hand tightened into a fist. She was done being pushed around. With a scream, she drew her sword. All her frustration exploded into a single, powerful strike. Her blade hummed with energy, the ground shaking from the force of her attack. The energy from her attack slowly faded. Her knight, Veron, watched her from a distance, letting the moment settle. Veron's voice broke the silence. He told her that her sword was wild, reflecting her feelings. Julie just said his name. Veron looked at her, his expression serious. She looked down, embarrassed. She apologized for showing him such an ugly side of herself. But Veron told her not to worry. He understood completely. He then went on, saying he couldn't believe her brother was forcing her to marry such a terrible man. But before he could finish, Julie cut him off. She reminded him that it wasn't proper for a knight to talk about someone like that. The two of them stood there in silence. Veron didn't know what else to say. Julie smiled softly. She told Veron not to get his hands dirty for her, insisting she was fine. Veron just stared back, his expression unreadable. He didn't say a word. Julie announced she was heading back and told him to get ready. Veron simply agreed, but as he watched her, something in his eyes shifted. A decision was being made. He watched her walk away, his mind completely fixed on her, and that's when it hit him. He thought to himself that he'd finally found an answer to all this pain, a way to prove his loyalty. He gripped his sword. This was something only he could do. He made a silent promise. He would make her happy, no matter what it took. Deculayan walked across the campus, his mind already on the future. He'd spent over 6 hours on Epherene, but he knew it was a necessary step. He could feel the world shifting around him. The main quest was about to begin. If you liked the story, subscribe for the next part. Thank you.